Tom said what he had to say in about 40 seconds, which is an efficient amount of time to end 8 months of someone's life. I heard it from the hallway, the flat, measured voice of someone who had decided something and was delivering the decision cleanly, without revision or retreat. Then he left. The door closed, and Jess turned around from the doorway, and I was standing in the hall behind her, and she looked at me, not with devastation, not with the face of someone whose world has just ended, but with the specific look of someone who has just had a door close and is standing in the space left behind it, taking stock. And she said, "Now what?" 2 words. She said them the way you say something when the real sentence is too much and the only thing that will fit in your mouth right now is the shape of it, the gesture and the direction of the thing, not the thing itself. I told her I'd order food. She said okay. She picked up the green blanket from the couch, wrapped it around herself, and sat down. I ordered food. But I heard what she said. I just didn't know yet what to do with it. My name is Sam Calloway. I am 32 years old. I am a civil engineer. I design the infrastructure that holds things up and connects them. Drainage systems, road underpasses, the unremarkable foundations that let a city function without anyone having to think about them. I have been told this says something about my personality. The colleagues who say this are not wrong. Jess Fenn and I had been living together for 18 months. She was a primary school teacher, patient, specific, the kind of person who solved problems by finding the one angle that made them suddenly make sense, and who was genuinely puzzled when other people couldn't find the same angle. She was good at it. She was also good at making a flat feel like a home by some process I had never been able to fully reverse engineer. Things ended up in the right places. The light was usually on when it should be. The kitchen smelled right. I had lived alone before this and not thought it was lacking. Then I had lived with Jess and understood what had been lacking. She had a green throw blanket she had claimed from the couch sometime in our first month. In the quiet, permanent way she claimed things, without ceremony, without asking, simply by using something until it was hers. I had bought the blanket. It was hers now. I had made my peace with this before I fully noticed it happening. She had been with Tom for 8 months. He was fine, competent, pleasant, without any particular quality that would have made him difficult to like, and without, I had concluded at some point, any particular quality that I could identify as specifically suited to Jess. I had never been able to explain to myself, satisfactorily, why I found this so aggravating. I want to be honest about this. I was not a neutral observer of that relationship. I had not been neutral for a long time. I had just been very careful and very busy not examining what that meant. It was a Tuesday evening in February. I heard the key in the lock from the kitchen, and then I heard Tom's voice in the hallway, a particular flat, resolved quality to it that told me, before the words came through, that this was not a normal end of evening conversation. I stayed where I was. Some instinct said to. There was a low exchange, then a pause, then the door, and then silence. I walked into the hall. Jess was standing with her back to me, looking at the closed door. Her coat was still on. Her bag was still on her shoulder. She hadn't made it past the entrance. Tom's footsteps on the pavement outside tracked away and then disappeared entirely. The hall was cold from the open door, the specific February cold that gets into the gap at the bottom of the frame. The overhead bulb cast everything in the slightly too yellow light that bulb had always cast, which I had been meaning to replace for 6 months. She stood there for a moment. I stood behind her. Neither of us moved. Then she turned around. She looked at me the way people look at someone when they have just run out of the version of themselves they were performing and are standing in whatever is underneath. Not crying, not collapsed, not performing anything. Just there, in the specific stripped-back way of someone who has just had a thing removed and hasn't decided yet what to do about the space it left. "Now what?" she said. I said I'd order food. She said okay. She walked past me into the sitting room, picked up the green blanket from the back of the couch without looking for it, found it by habit, the way you find things you have used 1,000 times, wrapped it around her shoulders, and sat. I stood in the doorway for a moment. She was looking at the blank television screen, her coat still on, the blanket around her, the bag set down somewhere between the door and the couch. I ordered food. I did not say the thing I was thinking, which was not about food. I found something on the television that required nothing from either of us. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch. Her end. The end she always used. And we ate when the food arrived and watched without watching, and at some point she stopped eating, and I heard her breathing go slow, and even in the way it goes when someone falls asleep in a warm room. I stayed until the film ended. I turned off the television. I left the lamp on, the low one, the one she preferred. Then I went to bed and thought about 2 words for longer than I was going to tell anyone. I told myself what you tell yourself. She had just been through something difficult, and she was my friend, and what she needed right now was practical support from someone without a complication. I told myself this with some conviction for about 4 days, which is how long it took before I ran out of ways to make it convincing. Then I thought about the other thing. Now what is only 2 words, but it is doing the grammatical work of a much longer sentence. You can say now, what about dinner? You can say it about a changed plan or a broken appliance or a Tuesday evening that went sideways. You can also say it while standing in a doorway still in your coat, looking at the person who has been waiting in your hall, and mean something that has nothing to do with any of those things. Something that has been sitting behind your teeth for a while, waiting for the reason you'd been keeping it there to finally leave. I had heard all 3 possibilities at once. I had acted on the first one. I am a civil engineer. I design load-bearing structures for a living. I should have done the calculation before I ordered the food. The honest assessment, done 4 days later in the quiet of my own room, was this. I had been not saying something for long enough that I had stopped noticing I was not saying it. And then Tom had walked down the pavement, and Jess had turned around, and in the 2 words she said, I had heard the shape of the thing very clearly. I just did not know yet if what I heard was what she had meant. The thing about living with someone for 18 months is that you accumulate evidence whether you intend to or not. You learn their patterns, their habits, the specific grammar of how they move through a shared space, and if you have been paying a particular kind of attention, not examining it too closely, just letting it accumulate, it adds up into something that, once you start looking at it directly, is difficult to misread. 4 months ago, we had been in the supermarket together on a Sunday, a joint shop that had become a regular thing without any of us deciding it would be. We were in the checkout queue and Tom called. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She answered. But she had looked at me first, and the looking at me had taken long enough that it was a choice, not an accident. She turned away to talk, and I loaded the bags, and I told myself I had misread it, and I was not certain that I had. 3 months ago, a friend's dinner party. Tom was busy. We went together, which we did sometimes, because we were friends and it was practical. Somewhere during the evening, someone used the words "you two," easy social shorthand, not meant as anything. She laughed. She did not correct it. She looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked at me, and then she looked somewhere else. It lasted less than 3 seconds. It lasted long enough. 3 weeks before the door, she was on the couch with the green blanket when Tom called. I was in the kitchen making tea. I saw, through the doorway, her look at the screen. She put the phone face down on the cushion. She sat with it like that for nearly 2 minutes, the phone face down, her hands in her lap, something working through her face that I was not close enough to read. Then she picked it up and went to her room to call him back. That is not how you treat a call from someone you're glad to hear from. I knew what it was. I did not know what to do with knowing. There was also the contact name. I noticed it 6 weeks before the door, her name in my phone, which I had entered when we first moved in as Jess, and which now said simply Jess. I had not made this change deliberately. I could not identify the moment I had made it. It had just stopped being Jess, at some point the qualifier gone, like scaffolding removed when it was no longer necessary. I noticed it, and I did not change it back, which is a decision of a kind, even if you decline to call it one. And then, the one I had not let myself think about until the door, 2 days before Tom ended it. She had asked me, casually, in the kitchen, whether I would want to stay in the flat if she moved out. She had said she was just thinking about the future, planning ahead, nothing specific. I had said yes, probably, depending on the rent. She had nodded and made her tea and left the room. She had not been thinking about moving out. I had known this at the time. She had been asking something else, the draft of a question, the test for an answer, the kind of thing you float when you are trying to find out where someone stands before you risk standing there yourself. I had answered the wrong question, on purpose, I think, because I was not ready yet to answer the real one. I was very ready now. 2 weeks after the door, things were surfaced normal. She had not cried, as far as I had seen. She had not mentioned Tom. She went to school, came home, made tea, moved through the flat with the ordinary rhythms of someone who was managing something, but managing it entirely internally. The green blanket was back in its usual place on the back of the couch. Everything looked the same. What was different was something underneath the same. A quality of attention she had when I was in the room. A quiet, ongoing awareness. The sense of someone working towards something they hadn't found the right shape for yet. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped, not started, by the particular quality of the silence where it used to be. On a Saturday morning, 16 days after the door, I was at the kitchen table with my coffee. She came in and put the kettle on. She was wearing the green blanket as a shawl over her pajamas, the way she sometimes did on weekend mornings when she was moving slowly. The light outside was gray and low, a February morning that was not committing to any particular quality of day. The plant on the windowsill, the mug on the drying rack, the specific domestic Saturday quiet of a flat when neither person is anywhere to be. She made her tea. She turned around. She looked at the table rather than at me, the specific look of someone who has been composing a sentence for a while and is nearly ready to say it. "I've been thinking about what I said," she said. At the door. I went very still. "The now what?" She held her mug in both hands, the green blanket still around her shoulders. "I've been trying to figure out what I meant by it." She looked at me then, not away. At me, with the direct, slightly uncomfortable quality of someone who has been circling something and has decided to stop. "I think I know," she said. She sat down across from me. The green blanket settled around her as she sat. She held the mug in both hands, and she looked at the table for a moment, not avoiding me, just finishing a thought, with the expression of a person who has been carrying something to a specific destination and has finally arrived at it, and is taking one breath before she puts it down. I waited. "I stayed with Tom past the point I should have," she said. Not because he did anything wrong and not because I was unhappy, exactly. I stayed because it was easier than the alternative. She looked at her tea. And I don't mean easier than being alone. I mean easier than having this conversation. She paused. This specific conversation. With you. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, nothing particular was happening. A February Saturday carrying on with its own business, indifferent to the conversation happening inside it. I kept telling myself it was because we lived together and it would make things complicated and I could easily be wrong about what I thought. She looked up. And then, he ended it, and I was standing at the door, and you were in the hall behind me, and the only thing I could find that fit in my mouth was now. What? Because that's what I actually meant. She set her mug down. I think it has been the question for a while. I just kept not asking it. She waited. Her hands were around the mug, not moving. I said, "You don't have to." I stopped. Then, if this was just the shock of it. That night. You don't have to. She looked at me steadily. It wasn't just the night of it, she said. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough, the kind of settling that happens when a weight you have been carrying at a careful, deliberate angle is finally allowed to find level. The kind you don't announce. I thought about every piece of evidence I had filed and not examined. The supermarket queue. The dinner party. The phone face down on the cushion. The contact name I had changed without deciding to change. All of it sitting in a row, like a sentence that had been written one word at a time, slowly enough that I could pretend I hadn't noticed it becoming readable. I said, "I changed your name in my phone at some point. I don't know when." She looked at me. "It used to say Jess, the way you'd enter a new flatmate." And then it didn't. I noticed 6 weeks ago, and I didn't change it back. I looked at my coffee. That was a decision. I just wasn't calling it one. She went still. Her fingers tightened once around the mug. "I've been making your tea without asking," I said. "I've been finding reasons to be in whatever room you're in. I sit on your end of the couch, because that's where you sit, and being near where you usually are is..." I stopped. I told myself these were just things you do when you live with someone. They're not just that. They haven't been just that for a while. She looked at me for 1 second longer, then felt safe. Then she looked at the blanket on her shoulders. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Gently, a question. She looked at our hands, then up at me. She didn't move her hand, long enough that it stopped being a question. She said, "I have absolutely no idea what we do now." I said, "Neither do I. But we live together, so we have time to figure it out." She looked at me for a moment. Then she laughed, just once, brief and real. The kind that comes from somewhere under a long sustained pressure when it finally finds an exit. That is either the most reassuring thing you have ever said or the most alarming. "Yes," I said, "probably both." She looked at the table. Her mouth did something at the corner that I had been noticing for 18 months. "Okay," she said. "Both fine." The following weekend, I noticed the green blanket had migrated from her side of the couch to mine. She was on her side without it, legs tucked under, mug in hand, and I was on mine, and the blanket was on my end, draped over the arm, and neither of us had put it there. Neither of us commented on it. I sat down next to her. We watched something, and this time we were both actually watching. This was how things changed for us. Not in announcements, but in small, quiet migrations of where things ended up. 4 months later, we were at the same dinner party where someone had once said "you two," and she had laughed and not corrected it. This time, she didn't look at the table. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us felt any need to clarify anything to anyone. The person who had said "you two" on the previous occasion looked between us and gave a small, knowing nod. The nod of someone whose reading of a room had been pending for some time, and had finally been confirmed. I appreciated the restraint of not saying anything about it. So did Jess, I think, though she would say she didn't notice. She noticed. I had poor survival instincts around moments like that. I had stopped trying to correct for them. 6 months in, she moved the green blanket to my room. Not permanently. It still appeared on the couch sometimes, the way familiar objects appear in the places where they've always lived. But she moved it to my room, and I understood what that meant without needing her to explain it, because 18 months of living with someone teaches you their language, and that was the language she was using. A year later, when people asked how two people who already lived together had ended up together, Jess said, "He ordered food and didn't make it weird." I knew then. I said, "She asked me a question at the door that turned out to have only one answer." I just took a few weeks to give it. What I didn't say, what I kept just for the two of us, was that she still texts me now what sometimes. When she can't decide between two options. When a plan has changed. When she's standing in the kitchen at 9 in the evening and the evening is open. I always answer. The answer is always this, and whatever comes next. That, it turns out, is the only answer to now what that has ever been worth anything. And it took a doorway and a February evening and 2 words to find it. If you've ever understood exactly what something meant and waited anyway, tell me about it in the comments. And if this felt like something someone in your life needed to hear today, send it to them. Subscribe if you want to hear more.